switching to Tom. His shelter was nearly complete. With some free time, he made several traps. Like Jesse, he chose a location against a mountain 6 days ago. Using a digging stick, he leveled a large area, drove several stakes into the ground, and secured the main framework with beams and footlocks. He constructed low walls with thin branches and planned to fill the upper part with leaves later. Collecting stones and clay from a creek, he built a fireplace in a corner by alternating layers of stone and clay and finally covered the entire cabin with a tarp. After completing such a large project, it's definitely time to eat. Tom was checking the traps he had set up in the forest. The first 2 were untouched, and he thought there was no hope left. A snowshoe hare providing over 800 calories and 18 grams of fat, the first rabbit caught this season. He processed it inside his shelter and couldn't wait to cook the rabbit meat, adding berries and roots for flavor before serving. The tender, aromatic meat was delicious. Carl's shelter was still rudimentary, and she wanted to improve it for the coming cold weather. However, food was scarce. She had to find something substantial to fill her stomach. With her bow and arrow, she ventured into the densely branched woods, making hunting difficult. Fortunately, she spotted a squirrel on the ground. Carly shot an arrow, humorously unsure if she had hit her target. After pushing through the branches, she ended up disappointed. Since hunting was unsuccessful, she tried fishing. Concerned about returning empty-handed again, Carla chose the calmest part of the water. A fish bit within minutes, but due to her haste, it slipped off the hook. She continued waiting by the river and soon caught a trout, which was substantial enough to rival Juan's 6 fish, providing about 800 calories and 100 grams of protein. Carly cleaned the fish and cooked it right away. The white, tender meat was especially tempting, rich in oil and flavor, which she believed would help her complete part of her shelter. Turning to Adam, his stomach started hurting last night. He didn't know if it was a parasite infection or just discomfort due to his diet. Adam hoped to feel better by morning, but by 10 p.m. his condition had worsened. He said if it was parasites, he would just have to endure as long as he could. Benji experienced similar symptoms, waking up with stomach pain this morning. He found some herbs on the riverbank known to treat stomach issues, hoping they would help. He decided to do nothing today but lie in the sun by the river. Adam also attempted self-treatment using birch bark, which is said to soothe the stomach when boiled in water. Unsure of the dosage, he randomly prepared some to drink and felt much better after resting. He then boiled water to wash his face, finally feeling relief from the discomfort. Benji's situation was not optimistic. By evening, he developed a fever. He suspected he had contracted a parasite from handling raw meat without proper hand hygiene. That night, Benji suffered from vomiting and diarrhea, quickly depleting his energy. By dawn, his mental resolve completely collapsed. Despite having plenty of food reserves, he was too sick to continue. Reluctantly, Benji chose to withdraw from the competition. On the 28th day of the competition, 7 contestants are still persevering. A few days ago, Terry killed a beaver. He built a miniature storage shed from logs and stored the beaver meat. For breakfast today, he had a clear stew made from the beaver's head, gnawing it thoroughly to extract every bit of meat from the bone crevices, aiming to consume every calorie. After eating, he had work to do. His most pressing task was to smoke and dehydrate the meat before it spoiled. Terry calmly sliced the beaver meat into strips, prepared hanging trays from wire and branches, and transformed his previously constructed storage shed into a smokehouse by lighting a fire at the base. After 20 hours of waiting, he lifted the top log with great expectation and was greeted by a delightful aroma. The beaver meat was smoked perfectly. To ensure dryness, he chopped the leftover meat to prepare for further smoking. The bone meat, rich in fat and connective tissues, was unsuitable for smoking, so he fried it until well done. The taste of the fried meat, humming with satisfaction, along with the boiled leftover fat and water, was excellent, leaving Terry immensely satisfied. Tom, undoubtedly a good man, didn't forget to make a small gift for his wife, even while participating in the Wilderness Survival Challenge. He crafted a pair of earrings from steel wire. With limited time in the morning, he had to leave to check his traps. Tom hoped for a snowshoe hare like last time, but after inspecting all traps without any catch, he found beaver tracks leading to a water dam. Knowing beavers are typically nocturnal and hardly appear during the day, he ventured out at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, just before dawn, with his bow and arrows to stake out near the beaver dam. Nearly 2 hours passed as daylight broke, and finally a beaver appeared. Tom took his shot, and the beaver, hit by the arrow, dove underwater and quickly vanished. He waited a few minutes to see if the body would surface, but saw nothing on the water. The retrieved arrow lacked even a single beaver hair, making Tom doubt whether he hit it or if the injured beaver had escaped back to its den. If that was the case, finding the body would be impossible, and his efforts would have been in vain, possibly alerting the prey. He planned to let the area settle for a few days before returning to hunt. In Temujin's shelter, a few mice had moved in, likely attracted by his cooking every time he lit a fire. Temujin decided to make several Paiute traps, specialized for small animals. He set them up at his doorstep with berries tied to the trigger stick, so any entering mouse would be crushed by a falling stone. Temujin had just finished setting his traps when he heard a grouse flapping nearby. Following the sound, he spotted the grouse on the ground and shot an arrow at it. Unfortunately, he missed by a few centimeters. The grouse flew to a tree about 10 meters away. Temujin followed and shot another arrow, but missed again. The arrow shot into the sky and disappeared. Following its trajectory, he found the arrow in a tree not far from his shelter. He tried to knock it down with a stick, but ended up having to climb the nearly 6-meter-high tree, a somewhat risky task. Falling could mean injury or worse. That evening, Temujin comforted himself in his shelter and built a mental defense. Only 2 days had passed, and his luck had completely turned around. At 2:30 p.m., he shot a grouse, thankfully capturing the beautiful bird. Not far from there, he heard another grouse and took another successful shot. 2 grouse in 1 day, more than he expected. On his way to the river, he spotted another grouse and hit it with 1 shot. With several pounds of meat, it was necessary to build a smokehouse to preserve it. To avoid attracting black bears to the camp, he processed the grouse by the river. He cut down a tree as thick as a thigh, removed excess branches, and used it as a crossbeam on a slope. He dug a fire pit underneath and piled branches on either side for cover. Temujin was ready to face any black bears attracted by the smell. The smoking temperature was just right, and the grouse meat on top did not drip grease, minimizing calorie loss. The remaining grouse skin and innards were his dinner for the day. Turning to the female contestant, Jessie, after a month, her shelter was still unfinished. Fortunately, the outline and frame were ready, and now she only needed to finish the walls and roof. This morning, Jessie saw snow on the opposite mountain ridge, signaling the approaching winter. It was time to finish the shelter and focus on gathering food. She stuffed collected rotten wood between 2 rows of stakes, stacking them to form a wall. After expending countless calories, Jessie's shelter was barely complete. She wanted to celebrate with a few fish, but the fish had moved to deeper waters. Jessie caught nothing. The wire traps she had set in the forest hadn't caught anything for 5 days. Tonight, she would go to sleep hungry, unavoidably feeling a bit sad. Juan caught 6 trout a few days ago. Today, only a few heads and half a bowl of aspic remain, valuable sources of fat. Tasting the success of fishing, he wanted to continue. However, his fishing rod had cracked. Not wanting to carve a new one, simply tied the crack with a rope and eagerly cast his line again. It seemed he had used up all his fishing luck last time, as he waited on the pier for a long time without a bite. Realizing it was pointless to wait, he planned to go hunting instead. After an unfruitful search in the woods, he returned to camp and surprisingly found a grouse in a tree. The grouse was high up, making it difficult to hit. Juan did not rush his shot and moved closer to shoot a blunt arrow. The grouse struggled vigorously after being hit, managing to shake off the arrow and escape unnoticed. Juan knew it would be nearly impossible to find it again as he looked around the similar terrain. He returned to the lakeside, somewhat disheartened. Yet, sometimes things work out unexpectedly. 3 days later, while hunting in the bushes, Juan encountered the injured grouse again, now cold and partially eaten by other animals. Back at camp, he carelessly dropped the grouse on the ground, attracting a white weasel by its scent. He shooed it away, but the weasel did not go far, lingering in the nearby bushes. Juan shot an arrow at it casually and surprisingly hit it. The weasel's meat was barely enough for a snack, but its fur was valuable. He planned to skin it carefully to gift to his girlfriend. After 34 days, 7 contestants were still enduring. Terry had been eating beaver meat for several days and, oddly, was still losing weight. Today, desperate, He scraped the last bits of fat from a preserved beaver skin, hoping to use the rendered oil to regain some weight, even considering drinking it if necessary. The oil residue became his snack. Jessie was still struggling with her shelter. After last night's heavy rain, Jessie's tarp had collected much water. She started using moss to fill the gaps in her walls. The entire wall, over 3 meters long, was gradually filled with moss. Today, her trap finally caught a squirrel. Although a fox had bitten off a part of it, she wouldn't have to go to sleep on an empty stomach drinking just water. Meanwhile, Adam was splitting wood in his front yard when a grouse flew by. Presented with such an opportunity, he took his bow and arrow and shot it. After plucking and gutting the grouses by the river, Adam headed back to camp, but was suddenly captivated by something in the bushes, exclaiming in surprise. He initially thought it might be food, but discovered it was actually a floating dock. Coming from a carpentry background, Adam had many ideas about how to utilize the pile of wood. He took the planks and nails back, first making a bench for resting, then a door. He positioned the remaining planks, sawed off the excess, and nailed them in place. Adam felt that a sturdy door was crucial to prevent black bears from entering his shelter, and also made it feel more like home. Tom disliked the dim light in his shelter, and saw the need for a more efficient lamp. He fixed a white reflector at the top of a branch and shone his headlamp on it, which significantly improved the light. Despite these improvements, parts of his shelter still needed work. Since the start of the challenge, Tom had caught 15 squirrels, 19 trout, 5 grouses, 1 snowshoe hare, and 1 gray noise duck. Although it seemed a lot, it was just enough to scrape by. He had already lost 88 pounds. Hunting daily, Tom was alert at the slightest sound of a squirrel, and with his skilled archery, few animals escaped him. Today was no exception. With 1 squirrel already in hand, Tom decided to pick some berries to take back. But then another grouse flew by and landed on the ground to feed. He shot it with an arrow. To preserve the fat on the skin, Tom roasted the squirrel directly over the fire, scraping off the dirt before it was perfectly cooked. To the average person, this might be hard to swallow, but hunger is the best spice, and Tom thoroughly enjoyed his meal, confident he could last a while longer. Unexpectedly, trouble came quickly. Due to the many gray noise crows in the trees near his camp, Tom made a bird trap. The concept was simple. When a gray noise crow landed on a branch, it would lose balance and get caught by a wire loop above. After setting the trap, Tom went hunting as usual but returned with only a bunch of lichens. He caught no animals. When he got back to camp, the bird trap had been triggered, but the wire snare wasn't flexible enough to tighten in time to trap the gray noise crow. 3 days passed, and Tom survived on just lichens and berries, constantly hungry but not delaying the construction of his shelter. Long-term lack of adequate food and clothing can lead to mental distraction and inability to focus. Indeed, while chopping a tree, Tom had an accident, falling onto a sharp tree stump and injuring his back, specifically at the kidney area. He planned to rest for a few days to recover, but without food, even rest was futile. Tom pinned his hopes on catching a beaver. That night, he was in so much pain that he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Before dawn, he took his bow and arrows and went to the river to keep watch. Unfortunately, the water remained unusually calm from beginning to end. He had to try to stay optimistic, as he could not sit idle. Tom decided to fill his time with small tasks, like finding some clay to seal the gaps in his chimney. However, another mishap occurred. The scarcity of food severely impacted Tom's thinking and judgment abilities and made his body very fragile. This time, he injured his knee, which swelled up considerably. Now, without external supplies and suffering from injuries, Tom felt he no longer had the strength even to chop wood. He had given his all and could go no further, so he made the call to withdraw from the competition. Meanwhile, the female contestant Carl was making jam to save for the winter when food would be scarce. Although she hadn't caught many animals, her shelter was built simply, which inadvertently saved a lot of energy. If she could keep making jam continuously, she might last another few weeks. On the 41st day, which was her mother's birthday, Carla made a cake out of lichens and moss. Despite these, she still hoped to have some real meat to celebrate her mother's birthday in the evening. Perhaps luck was on her side, as her previously unused snare caught a squirrel today. After so many days of eating wild vegetables and berries, she finally got to consume some protein that evening, savoring each bite before reluctantly swallowing. Let's check on Temujin, who goes hunting daily. This morning he was lucky. Just as he stepped out the door, a squirrel appeared as if offering itself up. The first arrow missed, but the oblivious squirrel stayed nearby, successfully shooting the squirrel with his third arrow. Notably, this was the first squirrel he had shot since starting the challenge, as he usually hunted grouse and had even shot 3 in one go a few days earlier. With the jerky he had just finished and now new food, Temujin couldn't help but feel hopeful about winning the $500,000 prize. Since catching a beaver, Terry hadn't gone out to hunt. Now that the meat was gone, he picked up his fishing rod and returned to the river. However, his body was not what it used to be. He often felt thirsty, and standing too long caused him to feel dizzy and faint. He needed to find a place to sit and rest. Additionally, he suffered from stomach pain and nausea. Naturally, his fishing efforts were unsuccessful. On the 42nd day, Terry built a large fire in his shelter, as it was the day for contestants' physical examinations. He wanted to see the state of his health. Despite eating a lot of beaver meat, his body was drastically thin. According to his symptoms, it was clear Terry had contracted parasites from the beaver, and the medical results confirmed this. Given his significantly declined bodily functions, the rules required Terry to withdraw from the competition for medical treatment. Carl, who had been eating the jam she made daily, saw her teeth discolor. She gathered some horsetail grass, which is rich in silica and can help repair tooth enamel. After grinding it into powder and brushing her teeth, they seemed much whiter. Previously unsuccessful in fishing, Carly noticed muskrat activity by the river and decided to hunt them instead. Considering they often swim, she tied her fishing line to her arrow to avoid losing it. Prepared, she waited by the river, dreaming of how she would spend the $500,000 prize if she won. Suddenly, a muskrat's head popped up. Carl took a few seconds to react, and just as she was about to shoot, the muskrat sensed danger and dived underwater. The next day, fully focused, she saw a muskrat swimming towards the shore and quickly shot it in the chest with an arrow. Surprised by her success, Carl immediately cooked the muskrat, which has 95 grams of protein and 730 calories per pound. Having not eaten meat for weeks, this meal renewed her determination. As heavy snow began to fall, signaling the coming winter and scarcer food, the real challenge for the contestants began. Adam, still with a few planks left, prioritized food and warmth for the winter. He planned to use the last planks for his windows, needing to saw and level the uneven wood, secure the frame, and then install the boards. As temperatures dropped, grouse hid deeper in the forest, requiring him to venture into new areas. His efforts paid off when he found a snowshoe hare, a rare catch only previously trapped by Tom. With his skilled archery, Adam killed the hare, which was quite large. That evening, he indulged in rabbit stew, savoring a change from the constant diet of squirrel and grouse, chewing thoroughly to waste nothing. Jessie was certainly unique, finishing her shelter on day 43 of the challenge. Although she had moved in 10 days earlier, the walls were still bare, needing more wood and moss, which kept her busy until now. Jessie's body was nearly at its limit. She had been hiccuping frequently in the past few days and felt waves of nausea. Clearly, eating too little had damaged her stomach. If she couldn't find food soon, her condition would worsen. Jessie crawled into the bush to check the traps she had set, but caught nothing, falling into despair. Temujin, the Asian contestant, lived up to his name. He managed to kill a squirrel with a throwing stick, a feat others couldn't achieve with a bow and arrow. Thanks to the active squirrels and grouse around, Temujin had sustained himself on them for over 40 days. Not far from his camp, he spotted a grouse pecking at the ground, which quickly became his next catch. Juan noticed the fish had moved to deeper waters farther from the shore. He decided to extend the dock by connecting 2 tripods with a beam, pushing them out with a log, and then laying more logs to form a platform. His fishing attempts were successful. He caught 3 trout. Even looking at the cooked fish, Juan couldn't muster the appetite to eat, fearing it would be counterproductive if he vomited. By day 45, Jessie's situation was bleak. Unable to find any food, she was forced to drink water, which she vomited shortly after. That night, she vomited repeatedly, like a fountain. The next day was the crew's medical checkup. When they found Jessie, she was barely alive in bed, vomiting from just moving around and unable to even think about eating or drinking. Seeing her condition, it was clear she needed urgent medical evacuation. After living on muskrat meat and bone soup for 3 days, Carl had to hunt again. Despite many active squirrels in her area, her poor archery skills were evident. One arrow bounced off a blunt head, and another shot up into the sky. The missing arrow took a long time to retrieve. Realizing she wasn't cut out for archery, and with the river frozen, fishing seemed even less likely. Carla decided to rely solely on traps, setting up 5 more wire snares in an area frequented by squirrels. If these failed, she didn't know how she'd survive. Fortunately, as winter began, the usually unproductive traps caught the first squirrel of the season, which Carly planned to stretch into 3 meals. The taste was so delightful she longed for more. Looking back, hunger kept Adam awake all night. A single snowshoe hare barely sufficed for a day's meal. This morning, he dragged his tired body out to hunt again amidst strong winds. The loud wind impaired his ability to hear animals and posed a risk of toppling trees. After walking along the river for over 3 hours, Adam not only failed to find anything but also lost an arrow from his quiver to a tree branch, with no clue where it fell. This hunting trip was a loss in more ways than one. For the first time, Adam found himself missing his family and friends. Despite usually preferring solitude, now he just hoped to survive each day. Juan also had a sleepless night due to the wind. He set 2 tasks for himself today. First, he tied a hanging rope to air out his sleeping bag, preventing the down from clumping and reducing its insulation. Second, he chopped some branches to make his bed thicker and more comfortable. Focusing on sleep, Juan adopted a new plan to fast, planning to drink only a few cups of raw water each day and spend the rest of his time sleeping in the melon shed to minimize energy use. He hoped this would sustain him for about 20 days, by which time he might nearly be the champion. Temujin urgently needed new food to boost his spirits. After wandering a large circle in the woods, he finally saw 2 squirrels chasing each other. Perhaps his poor condition affected his performance. This time, he missed his prey. The long trek drained much energy, and Temujin felt increasingly unable to cope. He began considering trapping as an alternative. Near the river, he hid grouse innards in a pile of rocks, originally intended to attract a bear, but only crows had visited. Temujin used the grouse innards as bait in a bird trap. The principle was simple. When a bird landed on the precarious perch, it would fall, pulling a stone to tighten a noose around the bird's legs. Additionally, Temujin set up several wire snares in the forest targeting squirrels, hoping to maintain food supplies without daily long treks. After his previous failure, Adam ventured further in search of grouse. After an unknown duration, he finally spotted one and easily shot it down with his steady archery skills. Unlike the joy of past successes, this time Adam felt a sadness from within. Throughout the challenge, he had killed many squirrels and grouse. Adam was growing weary of this life. Even with occasional meat, he still lost a pound a day. Relying on small animals couldn't reverse the situation. Only hunting a bear would suffice. Adam's body could no longer support long hunting trips. Climbing slopes was extremely difficult, and he had to stop to rest every few minutes, even on flat ground. Adam knew he needed to survive over 70 days to likely win. He could last 50 days on squirrels and grouse, but with his current weight and physical condition, he didn't know how he would make it through the next 20 days. Not wanting to risk his health to the point where he couldn't work after returning home, Adam quickly chose to withdraw. Temujin, an Asian contestant, had success with his wire traps, catching a squirrel this morning. He subdued it with a homemade throwing stick. Estimating the size of the squirrel, he calculated it provided about 540 calories and 15 grams of fat. This was clearly not enough to maintain his weight, but any food at this point could influence the outcome of the competition. With dropping temperatures, Temujin hurried to repair his shelter to block the wind. He needed to gather many spruce branches. Having lost 44 pounds, Temujin felt his body fat depleting. Tasks that were easy for most people were exhausting for him. He saved a grouse and a lot of reindeer moss for Thanksgiving, hoping it would boost his morale to continue. Carl's shelter was the simplest. Facing harsh winter weather, she planned to make a stove. She found clay nearby and cleared a space with her hands and feet, then gathered dry branches and hay. She bundled them, applied the clay, and assembled the stove and chimney. After lighting the wood inside, the fire would leave a hardened stove. Initially, everything went smoothly, but the thin layer of clay cracked, leaving a large hole. Carla wasted a lot of effort and eventually dismantled the stove. She had previously made a lot of jam, which now came in handy. Unable to get meat, she could at least fill her stomach with jam. Carl set several wire traps in the woods. As heavy snow fell, the traps were buried under thick snow. If not for the colorful ribbons tied to the trees, it would have been difficult to locate them, let alone catch any game. Nevertheless, Carly remained optimistic and refused to give up. Juan was extremely frugal, even dressing inside his sleeping bag to conserve every bit of heat. When he went out to fetch water in the sleet, he didn't want to stay outside any longer than necessary, fearing hypothermia. After collecting water, he quickly returned to his shelter. To prevent the tent fabric from being overwhelmed by snow, he added extra tree sticks for support on top of his shelter. The competition reached day 59. Since deciding to fast and survive on water, Juan was either sleeping or drinking. Today, he finally found something to do and prepared to make an ice pick. After peeling and shaping the selected wood and attaching an axe head, his ice pick was ready. He planned to try ice fishing once the ice thickened a few more centimeters. Carly faced a small turning point. She initially went out to collect pine resin for fire starting but stumbled upon a squirrel moving under a large log. Seizing the rare hunting opportunity, she quickly drew her bow and shot. To her own surprise, she hit the squirrel, her first catch in the challenge. Carly returned and roasted it, chewing by the fire and wishing she could eat squirrel every day. Temujin, armed with a bow and arrows, went hunting again. However, times had changed. Grouse blended into the deeper woods, and squirrels hibernated in their burrows, not venturing out. After wandering for several minutes and seeing nothing, Temujin reluctantly resorted to the last grouse he had saved for Thanksgiving. His body condition didn't allow him to wait any longer. He hoped the meal would provide enough strength and spirit to continue. The grouse, paired with reindeer moss, filled another pot. He greedily enjoyed this last feast, finally feeling full. By day 62, Temujin felt his physical condition worsening. Even walking a few steps exhausted him. Nearby branches suitable for fire were nearly depleted. Chopping wood and returning home had become his physical limit. After pondering all night in his shelter, he decided to use his last resort, packing up and calling the show's producers to withdraw. Temujin felt he had given his all. Walking out on his own was more dignified than being carried out. Now only Carl and Juan remained. This morning, Juan unusually wanted a cup of hot tea. Normally, he drank directly from the icy river, showcasing his remarkably strong stomach. After fetching water from the river, Juan started a fire in the fireplace of his shelter. To his surprise, the can he used as a firebox was an old paint can with leftover paint inside. When heated by the fire, it released a foul, toxic fume. Juan quickly felt headache and nausea. Previously, he had always cooked and boiled water outside the camp, so this problem had remained unnoticed until now. Fortunately, it didn't lead to a serious issue. He carefully knocked the paint can out and replaced it with a clean one, then filled the gaps with some clay. The new fireplace worked just as well. Turning to Carl, she still had some dried fruit pulp in her shelter, which, along with hot spruce tea, could barely replenish some energy. The freshly snowed ground finally showed tracks of white rabbits, which excited Carla but also worried her. She doubted her ability to draw her bow. Sadly, she was so weak that she couldn't pull it, making her helpless even in front of a white hare. Carl struggled not to cry. Normally, one would quit the competition by now, but Carla had a cancer-stricken friend who loved the wilderness. She stayed in the competition not only to win the prize money to fulfill a dream, but also to leave some footage for her friend. Now, she had to rely on her traps. Carly made snow boots out of branches, hoping they would save her energy while checking traps. Juan continued to survive on water each day. Despite previously talking about ice fishing, he hadn't made any moves. On day 75, Carl expressed to the camera that she could no longer find food, and her traps were empty. Her body fat reserves were depleted, and every joint ached. After much thought, she reluctantly made the call to quit the competition. She would regard this experience as a spiritual treasure of her life, as she might never have such a unique opportunity again. Juan became the last man standing. The crew informed him of his victory under the guise of a medical check. Unaware of the real situation, Juan worried about failing the health check and quickly made a fire to boil water, drinking half a pot to temporarily boost his condition. However, the medical check was just a formality. The staff distracted him with conversation while his girlfriend quietly approached from behind to announce his victory. Congratulations to Juan for winning this season's competition.